Hello, friends. Welcome to the Tell It Like It Is podcast. I'm your host, Alexi Bailey, and I have a very special guest today. Jane, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Do you want to give a brief introduction or say anything?
Sure. Well, we know each other from the neighborhood. I think we first met at Little League.
Yes.
Is that right? Where our children were playing and then jogging, and we saw each other at Maddie. So we've had a few interactions. I've been in Princeton for 10 and a half years.
Okay.
We moved here in 2011 so that I could do my PhD in American history at Princeton. I'm a legal historian, and I now teach at Temple Law School.
Nice.
And we felt very committed to the community. So when it was time for me to look for a job, academic job hunts are often far-flung. We were really focused, if possible, on staying here. So
nice.
So yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for taking the time. And I value the work that you do. And, when we met at the Little League, we just had a great conversation. And every time I see you and we stop and talk for 5 minutes, it just goes there, right? And the reason why I started a podcast was because I was having these kinds of meaningful conversations, and I really felt like there was value to share. So a lot of the conversations that I revolve around is how can we get better, and America is getting better and people are doing the work, and America is such a mixed bag. There's all these, there's a million things happening. And so it's interesting, and I think it's important to have conversations to kind of clarify, inform, and just reinforce and empower and just say, hang in there, My last guest before this was an African-American young lady. And she was a little bit like, I guess there's a lot of African-American sentiment of like, America doesn't care, and you're not fixing these things that you said you were gonna fix. And it's just kind of like not getting better. I don't want to say not getting better. It's just, it's not getting better fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you're doing the work. Like, what are you seeing out there?
It's funny. The perspective that it's not getting better and it's not getting better fast enough is in some ways completely true, right? It's not getting better fast enough. Racial injustice is not being ameliorated fast enough. I think there's been a spotlight shone on the history of racial injustice in this country recently through the protests the Black Lives Matter protests starting in the summer of 2020. I think the 1619 Project has done a lot to kind of bring attention, controversial attention, but attention to the kind of history of race, the role of race in this country. And that is, I think, by and large, salutary, certainly important, and important to for everyone to be reminded of the history of injustice in this country. But I also think we should steer clear of the temptation to kind of throw up our hands, to say,
of course,
there's no, it's been so bad for so long. Is there any hope that things will get better? I'm really, there are a lot of historians study what is known as the long civil rights movement. It's not something I study, but one of the lessons from the idea of redefining the civil rights movement as something that extended for decades, not just began with Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 and ended with the Voting Rights Act, is to realize that it's a long struggle and it's not always forward, right? You take one step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There is progress. Sometimes there's regression, right? It's not a steady drumbeat forward, but you can keep moving. You can keep you have to keep fighting, right? It's all about the process.
You said those 2 steps back. Like, what are those?
Well, so I think in historical terms, after the Civil War, there was a period in which radical Republicans in Congress introduced legislation that was pretty powerful in terms of protecting the rights of free Black people in the South who were being oppressed by former Confederates, members of the KKK. The KKK was growing fast. There was a lot of political, racial violence. And for a while, the federal government took kind of muscular action to really tamp that down, passed some really kind of powerful legislation, some of which we still rely on today.
Right.
And then there was a period of retrenchment, basically. The South called it redemption because the white Southerners were redeeming the rightful rulers. But it was, it was the KKK was basically triumphant. Black participation in elections effectively stopped. And it was this very dark period. And then getting into the 20th century, lynchings were on the rise and were at their peak in the early 20th century. So it was a very dark period where it looked like so many of the gains that had been won through bloodshed in the Civil War and then cemented, it looked like, through the kind of bold acts of the Reconstruction Congress and free Blacks on the ground, were being torn away. And then you have, beginning in the 20th century, kind of steps towards what we think of kind of in common conversation as the civil rights movement, with Brown v. Board of Education, Martin Luther King, all of the kind of things that our children learn in Black History Month in school. But you have these kind of like forward and then backward, and then forward and then backward.
Right. Can you speak to any of the backward that happened after Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement?
Yeah, you had so the civil rights movement was, kind of, depending on how you define it, extended through, at least the late 60s. And I should say I'm not a 20th century historian.
That's okay. I'm going to move this back just a little bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But then you have the kind of rise of the right. So you have, and there's been a lot of terrific work on this to kind of, some of the work focuses also on the kind of response to the women's rights movement. So Phyllis Schlafly and the defeat of the ERA and these efforts to roll back a lot of these kind of efforts to ensure equality, robust federal legislation, robust federal regulation. The 70s were also a time when there was, increasing federal regulation of the environment. And many forces on the right, big business, social conservatives, and this is, again, I feel like I should.
That's okay. I told you didn't have to prep for this.
Yeah.
So what's behind that question is trying to understand this thing, right? Like, is America just moving forward? And you're saying, there are these times when we take steps back. And I think a part of what I struggle with personally is trying to understand, like, if America thinks this is right, and then someone comes and says, oh, we should roll that back, like, automatically that shouldn't even be entertained. So why are we still entertaining conversations for things that we acknowledge as moving backwards after we've taken the step?
Well, who's the we, right? The we acknowledge.
Right.
From your perspective, my perspective, it's a step backwards. But I think from, the perspective of someone of a different political persuasion, it's not a step backwards. Right. It's reclaiming the rightful order of things, right? So the fact that the conservative movement that kind of put an end to many of these kind of what we would think of as progressive Reconstruction changes in the South after the Civil War, the fact that it was called redemption, these people thought of themselves as redeemers. They were restoring the rightful order, right? So from the perspective of a conservative, the civil rights movement went too far. It was not advancing our country. It was leading our country into chaos. And the kind of conservative pushback would have been viewed from the perspective of someone on the political right as a necessary correction to this kind of unrest that had been released. And obviously, there are multiple perspectives that make up the kind of conservative movement in this country. But I think it's not a question of like everybody agreeing that we've moved forward and then everybody kind of like taking their eye off the ball and things rolling backwards. It's more a question of kind of contests of ideas. Some ideas kind of gain ground, and then other ideas push back.
Right.
And politics is a part of this, and race is a part of this, and class is a part of this. Yeah.
So I mean, so this I'm familiar with it, right?
Yeah.
And it's happening. We know it's happening. My question is, we say liberty and justice for all.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about going too far, like, how does that make sense?
How does somebody who is critical of these kind of progressive movements, how do they square that with liberty and justice for all?
Right.
I mean, some of the standard critiques are liberty and justice. It's redefining liberty and justice for all, or conceptualizing liberty for some. If you have liberty, that means I don't have liberty, right? A kind of like zero-sum game in which gains for you means losses for me. I mean, that's a lot of what we hear today, right? In the analysis of kind of Trump supporters, to the extent that Trump supporters are often white, working class, people who have lost ground to globalization, to whatever. There's a sense that like,
sorry, this angle's not.
Oh yeah,
working.
yeah.
So it definitely relates, right? We know it's happening. We know the deal, but the question is, it's happening, and the idea of you losing ground, me gaining ground, is the idea of there's not enough for all of us, right? So how does that make sense to you?
Do I think that's true?
Yeah.
No, I think that's an incredibly unhelpful, wrongly divisive way of looking at, fundamental rights, goods in society. But it's a hard view to overcome. And it's an easy way to divide.
I mean, to me, I think it's more about manipulating the situation as opposed to any of this actually being true. Right? So what we're talking about here is, if America can just, wash away race and just everyone be free and equal, everyone equal opportunity, that's where we say we want to be. But still, to this day, we're still talking about us versus them, and these are both American citizens.
Right.
So as this conversation's happening, people are picketing and complaining, and like we're still divisive. So is that not clear? Like, I'll give you an example of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right. There's been a huge fight about voting rights lately, right? Yeah. And giving people water online, and these kinds of things. Like, obviously that prevents people from wanting to vote, and people actually voted.
Right.
Like, to me, that's clear as day.
Yeah.
Right? Would you say it's clear?
Yes.
So what blows my mind is to have people get dressed in the morning and walk into, and get on TV saying these things.
Right.
And it's like, with
a straight face.
Right. And I'm like, you're clearly just hurting America. And so why is this being allowed to happen?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, there's some, right. So how do you justify, if you are a Republican in Georgia and you are supporting a bill that's going to make it a crime to give water to somebody waiting online to vote? How do you justify that to yourself? Is that the question?
How do you justify that in the legal system? Like, this is America. Our laws say everyone can vote. Like, and you're like, why are we even entertaining that conversation? Like, how do we justify that?
Right. Yeah, that's another tricky thing. I mean, voting, who can vote has historically and still to this day is determined largely by the state. Now, there's certain in the Constitution has something to say about it. The Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution in such a way as to have something to say about it. Although just recently, court basically Alabama had produced, this is just this week, Alabama produced a gerrymandered map that resulted in one majority minority voting district, when really looking at the Black population in Georgia, there should have been two majority minority districts. In other words, Black Alabamans should, Alabamians should have been secure in their ability to elect two Black representatives to Congress. But this map produced through, these techniques that political scientists call like packing and cracking, where you kind of draw these weird districts to like make sure a lot of people are in one, this group is all stuck in this district. So all their voting power is consolidated there, and then they have very little clout in any of the other districts. So the Alabama federal panel, so a panel of federal judges, two of whom were appointed by Trump and one of whom was appointed by Bill Clinton, struck down this map and said it violated the Voting Rights Act and said you have to redraw it. And then the Supreme Court overturned that and said just this week, and said, I didn't read the opinion, so I've just read synopses, but essentially, this would be, I think they argued, or they concluded that this was too close to the election, too close to the primary, so it would cause chaos in the system, and all of these other arguments that are often trotted out to kind of prevent. Right. So I can't even remember how we got there, but yeah, how does the law support this sort of thing? And the law is,
So I think the underlying question that I'm asking here is, we can clearly see injustice, clearly.
Right.
You don't need to be a legal expert. Legal experts see it. The people who are doing it know it. The Supreme Court, do you think they know it?
I think some of them know it. Yeah, I think some are quite dismayed. Yeah.
And so this is America, right? We're hoping to make progress. And these things are still happening. They're still on the books. They're still being passed. The question is, maybe that's just who we are. We're saying we're not, but the reality is that's really who we are. Not justice for all, not freedom, not equality, not like. So, do you think that or no?
I think as you said when we started talking, it's a mix, right? Like we are a lot of different things,
right?
And things like the 1619 Project and all of the focus. The backwards historical focus on racial injustice has reminded a lot of people who, unlike me, don't spend their lives studying history. It's reminded people just how much ugliness there is in our past and our present, right? There's a through line between what's going on today and what happened back then. And I don't think that means that we are all bad and beyond hope, right?
Right.
I think that's where we started this conversation. I think we don't want to fall into that kind of nihilism or that defeatism, as tempting as it is, because things are ugly. Things are really ugly.
So I don't want to put you on the spot either with the question, right? So the idea is, we know that in the beginning, we had slave owners who wanted to keep slavery, right? They wanted to keep Black people, and I'm going to generalize, minorities down for the sake of their benefit. So at some point, abolitionists fought hard to say that's not okay. And what I'm saying is that what I can say I've seen is there's been enough pushback to where the point is where they say, okay, we're going to take the foot off the neck and we're going to back off. So what we're saying is there has been progress. There has been backing off.
But how did the foot off the neck come from the slave owners? That was the war, right? The foot did not come off the neck.
Right.
They were like, we're keeping our foot on the neck.
Right.
We're doubling down. And not only we're gonna use every tool we've got to shore up our power.
Right.
Sometimes moral persuasion works, right? I think, that's the kind of sunny interpretation of the 20th century civil rights movement, that through peaceful protest, Martin Luther King, inspired by Gandhi, changed hearts and minds, televised images of the violence of the segregationists in contrast with the peaceful protests of the marchers, beamed into the living rooms of Americans across the United States, helped to change popular opinion, enabling the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all these kind of triumphs of federal legislation. So hearts and minds can change. And sometimes that leads to real kind of more tangible improvements in people's lives, right? Because hearts and minds change, that results in political change, that results in legislation getting passed. The legislation has real effects on people's lives. And sometimes, hearts and minds are changed and it's not enough.
So, I mean, all right, so we're gonna get there. So basically when, as things got better and they were force and pressure to give more equality, I think there's still this idea of the owners, and the owners are trying to make their profits and will give just enough benefits, weekends off to people to kind of keep them happy and calm.
And weekends off are, also a product of legislation.
Right.
Yeah, right. So how much do those in power, those who want to keep the goods for themselves, how much do they give to kind of mollify, pacify the masses, and how much do they give because they're forced to? I mean, sounds to me that's kind of what you're asking.
Right, but I think what I'm saying with the voting is that there's clearly still this energy of, separating class, people at the bottom, and the owners, and that America is not just free and equal for everyone. There's a big divisive element that's still being fueled, and we can all see it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. There are lots of people way smarter and more learned than I am who've written about the kind of 20th and the unlikely bedfellows that comprise the kind of 20th century Republican Party. So you've got social conservatives, but you've also got kind of pro-business conservatives who are not necessarily natural allies, but they, there are certain lightning, kind of hot button topics like abortion that enable the recruitment of certain kind of segments that become loyal voting blocs, like, kind of the religious right. And that is a powerful way to win elections. And part of that kind of forming coalitions, bringing together these unlikely bedfellows, I think is race, right? Race is a powerful divider. So you play on people's racist fears, you play on this zero-sum notion that if Blacks get benefits, whites suffer, right? If people of color are getting advantages, whites must be falling behind. And that, I think, is a powerful way of convincing people to vote for you or to support policies that you support, to set aside other things that they might care about. So it's, so people who are single issue voters, right? Who are like, I'm not even going to examine the rest of your policy platform because I care about this issue. So that's a powerful way of attracting people to your party.
Right.
Yeah.
So based on your work, what would you like to see happen?
What would I like to see happen? I mean, you kind of, when you were telling me about this podcast, you were saying, it's important to do the work. And in some ways, I feel like people you've spoken with and your kind of local involvement. I mean, one way, not the only way, national politics is hugely important. So is local politics, right? And getting involved at the local level makes a difference, not just for your locality, but it makes a difference. It kind of, it
Trickles up.
Trickles up, right. It moves back on up the system. So I can't remember where I read this now, but there was some discussion recently about kind of what can a worried Democrat do about the current state of affairs, basically. And the tendency, at least for Democrats who are in a position and inclined to give political donations, the donations go to the people that talk. Everyone pays attention to national politics. That's what the media focuses on.
Right.
That's what conversations focus on.
Right.
You give your money to those, but that it is in some ways much more important to get involved in local races. So right now, one of the things that's going on is that people who have endorsed Trump's big lie that Joe Biden did not win the election, that Trump did, are running for office. And they are running for offices in which they will have power over basically whose vote gets counted. So they're running for a lot of local positions that in the past have been essentially apolitical. There's like sleepy races, nobody really cares about it, but all of a sudden there's this energy coming from this kind of national arena that's filtering down to the local level. And that's a real concern, right? If you've got people who believe the big lie and who are kind of not completely committed to the kind of fundamental tenets of democracy, counting every vote, et cetera, have the problem. So, I think people would be in many ways much better active Democrats who are sitting there wringing their hands like, what can I do? I live in Princeton. Princeton is a pretty solidly Democratic town. Like, if I apply my local energy here, what good will that do? I mean, I think it does do a lot of good, but I also think there's something to be done about the national scale by kind of looking to local races elsewhere, trying to help defeat these candidates who are kind of publicly positioning themselves to kind of undo the next election outcome that their party doesn't agree
So with. Democrats who are in Democratic places, they're comfortable with who they have in their office, they should look nationally at other.
So I say that I'm not, I have not done the research, and I really actually should look into this and see if, sorry, I'm getting my coffee. I should look into this and see, if there has been a list compiled of like vulnerable, or races where there's somebody who's kind of espoused.
Is there an organization doing that work, compiling those local lists?
I need to figure it out. I mean, the Brennan Center for Justice is an amazing organization operating out of NYU, but I don't think they do that sort of thing. I mean, they're not a political organization.
Well, I wanted you to shout out other, can you say that one again?
Oh yeah, the Brennan Center for Justice. They look at kind of basically, I mean, they're a C3 organization. They do a lot of research and kind of really fascinating kind of reports on contemporary issues and contemporary developments that kind of threaten the fundamental tenets of democracy. So they look at, campaign finance, they look at voting rights, they look at a lot of.
So what I was hinting at before is that there's this element of like, we have to still be careful about democracy in America. Like, what is that energy that's eroding democracy?
I mean, democracy threatens those who have power, right?
Right.
I mean, if you, I'm trying to think of a way to say this.
Take your time.
Democracy is not necessarily threatening to someone whose power really is based in the people. But if your power, if say you're a member of a political party that is losing its traditional constituencies, right? There are all these kind of
just so you know, you can speak freely. Like,
yeah.
I know you want to say it the right way. So, But as far as I'm concerned, you can speak freely. Say it,
No, I'm just thinking, so I think there are, the Republican Party today at the national level it benefits from the kind of way the Senate is set up, where rural states have kind of outsized clout.
Right.
They're, a voter in, South Dakota has much more influence than a voter in New York because of the way the Senate works, and that works to Republicans' advantage. But there's certain other kind of ways in which the Republican Party does not represent the interests of the majority of Americans, right? And so for the Republican Party, these structural kind of boosts that they get, like the Senate, like the Electoral College, are really important to them retaining power because they are not really advancing policies that most Americans want. The vocal minority for sure, but not the majority.
Right.
So that's democracy, pure democracy, right? If we were like, poof, wave my magic wand, we've amended the Constitution, no more Electoral College, popular election of the president, that would be really bad for Republicans.
Right. So that's what I want you to talk about. What is your work at the core? What would you like to see? That poof, that magic wand?
Oh yeah, let's get rid of the Electoral College for sure. Filibuster should go.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, so basically structural changes that would advantage, that would make level the playing ground in a way.
So we know that these older systems that's been in place for a long time benefit this party that's in the minority, and they're doing a lot of trickery to fight to maintain power. We can clearly see this struggle. Yes. So with this thing happening, the majority of Americans are saying, please, please stop. No, this is bad. This is bad. And educated people like yourself are saying, yeah, we hear you. Yeah, we see it. But when you go into the courtrooms and you have to say, all right, let's do away with all the things you said, they apply some legal maneuvers, grease some pockets, and they're still struggling to survive.
Well, I mean, a lot of these, the things I just mentioned, right? The Electoral College, the kind of structural inequities of the Senate, they're baked into the Constitution. So amending the Constitution is hard.
Right.
Very hard. So I think it's not just, kind of, and that meta level, it's not a question of kind of chicanery or like greasing palms. It's like, these are structural impediments that the filibuster is not. The filibuster could be done away with today, as long as there were 50 votes to do away with it. But so that is much more a question, I think. You've got two Democrats who are not on board with getting rid of the filibuster, and we've got a Senate, a Senate that's divided 50-50. So we can't move forward on getting the Democrats can't move forward on getting rid of the filibuster. So that is a question, like, who knows? There have been lots of people who've spent a lot of time wondering what's in the minds of Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. But
so, you mentioned the constituents of South Dakota and the Republican Party, right? What do you think? What are their goals? What do they want?
Oh, voters in South Dakota want a multitude of things, like.
But I don't mean the voters specifically. I mean the Republican Party are doing things, right? Like we said, to trigger single issue voters to support them, to keep these people on the ballot and in office. What are they doing? Why? What? They don't want the majority to get what they want. What do they want?
What do Republicans want? Right. Why do they want to stay in office? You could look at the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers want, deregulation. They want to make profits. They have a lot of money already and a lot of various companies, and they are interested in preserving and enhancing that power and that money. This is some ways like, a psychology question, like, why does Mitch McConnell want to stay in power? Why do people want power? I think I'm probably the wrong person to ask.
But here's what I'm saying, right? Hypothetically, if you take the job to be a senator, you want a good America, right? And when you see failing schools and people are saying, please fix my school, we need tax dollars, and you jump up and say, no more tax dollars for schools.
Right.
And you're fighting hard to make sure there's no more tax dollars for schools. And the Koch brothers are funding you and supporting you and all of these things. And America's not growing and healing. And like, do they see this? So
right.
Like, is this what they want?
Yeah, maybe you can have, it's interesting you mentioned taxes because people hate paying taxes. And I think there is a sense, and this, I think there is an argument. I don't want to pay these taxes. Either these taxes are not going to benefit me directly because my kids aren't in the schools, or I send my kid to private school or whatever. Or I don't trust the people in charge to spend my tax money wisely. There are two related arguments there.
Right.
Or I shouldn't be paying as much as I'm paying.
Right.
Someone else should pay more.
Right.
I'm sure, you've got an inefficient government, right? That people don't know how to spend the money. I'm not benefiting, someone else is benefiting. And I shouldn't have to be paying as much as I'm paying. So the system is not fair. I think those are the kind of three, kind of complaints that fuel kind of tax animosity.
So the people at the top are saying that.
Well, I think that's more that's the pitch to the voter.
Right.
The
people at the top are pitching that to the people in the middle.
Yeah, we'll lower your taxes. I mean,
right.
Everybody says we'll lower your taxes, right? You can't run for office and not say that.
Jane, I'll tell you this. I can tell you exactly what I think, but I'm really trying to get
I want to hear what you think.
Your piece, right? And I want you to tell me the facts, right? Kind of what's clearly out there, that's rooted in all of these things, right? I do think we have to change the Constitution. I think so, because America was made on fear and fair from the beginning, and it's not. There's still a lot of energy saying no, we can't even the playing field. We can't level this out.
Yeah,
and it's very intentional, and it's very much a fighting of distraction and divisiveness.
Yeah,
and that's just obvious. So you're doing the work. I want you to talk more about the work you are doing. But I think if the people who are doing the work stop talking to the people if they stop having legal conversations and started talking to the people would respond to that.
So give me an example of that.
Get on TV. Listen, the Koch brothers are doing this. This is what happens. This is how it works. Get out there and just explain it to the people in plain English. That's kind of what I'm doing here.
I see.
And if all of the educated people were saying it in plain English instead of trying to get senators to vote and call your senator, your senator's not going to do anything. I mean, there's very limited that calling your senator is going to do.
Yeah.
So I think if white people, forget black people, I don't even think black people should do anything. I think white people should make us think about this needs to end. America must change now. The way the civil rights movement looked, white people needs to do their own civil rights movement. And black people should stay home. Don't even show up. Just like all white people just go out there and say, this is unacceptable. Corporations can do what you want to do. You can make your money, you can do whatever you want to do, but you cannot control our government. That's unacceptable. And we know they're controlling our government. And we're kind of well, we're going to hopefully get some more Democrats in there in the fall. What?
Yeah.
We're playing their game, their way, and we're losing. and
Mhm.
we've been losing. Meanwhile, we know that human beings are dying. And we're kind of like saying, well, don't worry, we'll try to elect some people in the fall.
Right.
That's not that you're playing their game, and we've been losing for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
The money talks, and we don't have the money. So what do we have? The people. We need to stir the people,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and white people should stir white people. I don't think Black people should even be a part of it.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I felt like in the summer of 2020, it was encouraging to me to see how many white people were involved in protests. I mean, it doesn't take much to go walk on the street, honestly, but it was some sign that there was a kind of sense that this is not who we are. We want to be involved in making a stand and saying, we are not this country. I think the translation of that sentiment into politics was tricky. And so you get on TV and you say, like, this isn't working. White people, this is not your country. This is not who you are. Rise up. But then the question is, who hears it, right? I feel like MSNBC does that every night. You've got like,
there's a problem with those guys.
Yeah.
Those big news networks. We can talk about that, but we don't need them. We don't need to say it that way. But continue.
So I think there's a problem getting your message out. Like, there's so much out there. Like, how do you get heard? So that's a problem. And then the question is, how do you get people committed for the long run? And that's a question of kind of grassroots organizing, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you, and I think it's interesting that you say white people should focus on white people, to kind of basically stand up for, I mean, there are plenty of white people who are suffering and need, can have plenty of things that they themselves need to stand up for. But yeah, social movements in this country, elsewhere, are generally kind of mobilized. The grassroots, the kind of, people on the streets are the people who are fighting for their own rights, with kind of strong assist, often, hopefully, from people who are not as directly impacted by the injustices they're protesting.
Yeah.
So like white abolitionists before the Civil War.
Right, exactly.
White participants in the civil rights movement, white people marching in the summer of 2020, and how committed those white people are is, there's a range of commitment and a range of,
I think we got to the heart of it, right? So to me, and here's the thing, right? This is not about Black people and civil rights, what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about that. So if Black people all left America today, there's still a huge problem.
Yes,
here.
yes.
So I'm not saying white people should go and fight for Black people's civil rights. That's not what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying America has some huge problems.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And America needs to fix it.
Yeah.
Because Americans are suffering.
Yeah.
And it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we are able to talk about it this freely, understand it this clearly, have the numbers that shows it, and we're still like hoping to get Democrats in the fall. I like that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Democrats in the fall is not the answer.
Right. So the answer is
what I'm saying is, if we got like crazy serious, like, listen, everyone, each person should have a picket sign. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Once a year in the summer, we're going to DC.
Mm-hmm.
You take turns. You have one group go this weekend, another group go this weekend. We break it up the whole summer.
Mm-hmm.
How many summers do you think it would take?
A million.
A million summers?
I guess the question becomes, what changes are we hoping for?
We're going to change the Constitution.
Okay, so we want to amend the Constitution. How do we do that?
So what I want you to tell me is
how to amend the Constitution.
if we had what I said, right? All the white people, like, listen, there's, let's just say July and August, 8 weekends, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's 8 weekends, we have 1 million people each weekend, okay? Mm-hmm. That's just 8 million people. You volunteer, you pick your weekend, you come down however you want,
Mm-hmm.
You fly down, you drive down, we're gonna pick it around. That's it.
Mhm.
Okay. Now you have these 8 million people doing this every weekend in the summer.
Mhm.
Okay. And they could do the spring and fall if they can. Now we now have the fully support of everyone. We're gonna change. We're gonna fix this thing. How do we do it? What do we need to fix? That's what I want you to say.
Well,
And there's no resistance. We don't have to worry about,
I mean, you gotta agree with
Different-
Citizens United, though.
huh?
I mean, if
Say that
you're
again?
Citizens United,
Mhm.
the Supreme Court opinion, that basically allows, I mean, it's a little more particular, but it allows a lot of corporate money to flow into politics,
Mhm.
undoing a lot of legislation that had,
The 2 steps back.
yes, yes,
This is important. The 2 steps back is real.
yeah.
Because if we did this 1 year and it worked, little by little, the 2 steps back would creep back in.
Mhm.
So go ahead, Citizens
So
United.
get rid of Citizens United. That could potentially help. That could help. I mean, it would at least
So that's
lessen the
unconstitutional,
impact.
right? To have to have um, to have to have big corporate money flowing into politics. That's a big hurdle for the average little guy.
Right.
And this is something that's ongoing that we all know. And pretty much what we're saying here is if we can fix one thing, we would make that unconstitutional or illegal.
Right. Illegal. You would not prevent Congress from passing a law making it illegal.
Right.
Yeah. That would be huge. And if you could go even further, right? If you could get, there's a case from the 70s called Buckley v. Vallejo that basically limited what Congress could do in terms of regulating money in politics, because it said there was a First Amendment interest involved in spending money.
Mhm.
Money equals speech is the
Right.
kind of shorthand.
Right.
So you can't limit
So
someone's-
rich people can talk with their money,
Yeah,
and that's okay.
right.
What do you think about that?
I think I'm not totally unheedful of the warnings of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which would, is a staunch defender of that opinion. There are speech concerns, but it's hugely problematic opinion. So I would like to get rid of the money equals speech equation.
Okay.
If you can regulate money in politics, it would certainly empower average people in the political game, right? If the rich people can't contribute all the money they want to buy politicians, that would really
Change things.
change things, level the playing field. It would really mean, for instance, that your 8 million people splitting up their weekends might have a better chance of getting heard. Because right now, I think what would happen is you've got these people protesting and get news coverage. Politicians would feel some heat, but then they would get their K Street lobbyists coming to their office and saying, unfortunately, we're making up an enemies list, and anybody who doesn't get on
Anyone
board
who's
with this
Right.
is not going to get any corporate donations the next cycle,
Corporate donations
or
for,
any donations
for reelection.
for reelection.
Right.
For reelection.
That's something I have an issue with.
Mhm.
A $1 billion campaign.
Mhm.
I have a problem with that.
Mhm.
If you have a $1 billion campaign, like that, you're no longer American at this point.
Yeah.
I don't even know what you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's increasingly who parties turn to. Oh, let's get this independently, extraordinarily wealthy person to run for office because they can fund their own campaign.
Right.
And we know that campaigns take a lot of dough.
Right.
So, yeah.
Anything else you would change?
Well, we'd get rid of the filibuster. We'd get rid of the electoral college. I have to think more about the Senate.
So now let's say we got rid of the filibuster, we got rid of the electoral college, and now we've gotten rid of all of the money that's flowing into the senators, and now we have grassroots people that we like.
Mhm.
What laws, what would we change? What would we be doing?
What would we be doing? We would have a much stronger social safety net. So we would have healthcare for all.
So we passed that.
I mean, Yes, I think, I mean, these things would certainly have a better chance, right?
Right,
If we
right.
got rid
No,
of,
yeah. I mean, I think so. So there's no disagreement. We're just going down the list because I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of things.
yeah, free, I mean, it's kind of like Bernie Sanders' agenda, right? You'd have free community college. You'd have much more money flowing into public schools, public universities. You'd have stronger environmental regulations. We'd get meaningful climate change legislation that could possibly maybe do something. I mean, yeah, like I could compile a list of like 100 pieces of legislation that
I'm
I want
very
to see
serious.
passed.
So here's the thing that I think is not that tricky, right? So if we made that list, and one of the things we usually end with is next steps.
Mhm.
So if I could have, I don't need you to make 100,
Yeah.
but just like 8, right? The obvious 8,
Mhm.
right? I think these are the things that the 8 million people would want,
Yeah.
right? These are the things that we all want,
Mhm.
right? So at the beginning, I said, take Black people out of the equation, right? We're all suffering from lack of healthcare,
Mhm.
right? Whether you make $1 million, whether you make $1 million a year or 60,000 a year, we all will be better off,
Mhm.
right? So those things affect the marginalized more.
Mhm.
So it's not just about the marginalized, it's about helping everyone.
Mhm.
So these things would get a lot better.
Yeah.
So I think it's totally feasible. The thing is, as you begin to do that work, the people with the money are going to mobilize against you.
Mhm.
So we need to be clear what the goal is.
Right.
We need to be clear. My question, so here's my, and this is the putting you on the spot question.
Mhm.
Are you prepared to do that work?
Sure. Yeah. I think the problem for me and for a lot of people is like, tell me the work, right? Like, tell me the steps.
Yeah.
You get involved where you can,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, this is how I see it. We have you and 10 of your biggest scholarly friends
Mhm.
get on the steps and make a statement. Like, this is unacceptable.
Mhm.
The Citizens United must go.
Mhm.
I mean, again, the most uneducated person knows the system's broken.
Mhm.
It's no longer like we all are like, yeah, we know the system's broken. And we're just like, what are you going to do?
Right.
Right? So now the single issue voters, I want to help them
Mhm.
because they really want something. They're not doing it because they want profits. They really have these single issues that they really care
Mhm.
about.
And Democrats have single issue voters too. Like, I don't want to. It's not that
No,
everybody plays that game.
but that's what I'm saying. I'm saying I really want to fix America,
Mhm.
and to me, it's not something that's going to take another 500 years,
Mhm.
right? But it's going to be radical in the sense of it's going to be radical, like
Yeah.
on all levels, right? There's going to be people who are going to say, well, who's Jane anyway?
Yeah.
And then we're going to have to fight that battle.
Mhm.
But more importantly, the people who are willing to fight that battle. Because at the end of the day, for the first year or two, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I think most of us want to do the work, but not in an uncomfortable way.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Right. How much self-sacrifice?
Yeah.
Right. Self-sacrifice, not just of material comforts, but kind of, right. Are you willing to look a little crazy? Are you willing to, yeah.
Right. And Black people, when you see a George Floyd tape, you're willing to put yourself out there, but it has its limits,
Mhm.
right? But when we're talking about really restructuring America and really grabbing hold of these things, most people are like, I'm afraid of what's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So I understand anyone who's like, listen, I just had a baby.
Right. No, that's right. And there's like, if you're a Republican when you're 20, you have no heart, and if you're a Democrat when you're 50, you have no brain. There's like this like stupid little
Right.
saying that speaks to this kind of, as you get older, your concerns are magnified,
Right.
or you have more of them.
Right.
And so, right, kind of, and you have more, your self-interest is no longer just you, it's your kids and this, right? Yeah, there's more to be worried about losing.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's at the heart. This is what the podcast is about. It's really about what are you willing to do?
Yeah.
And like, well, people like, well, what do you mean? Do about what? And most people that I know personally well, they're like, well, what can I do?
Right.
Right. But if I know if I could talk to people and who are willing to do the work, I think we can get a lot done in a short period of time.
Right.
And it would look like the civil rights movement, you know, a lot of picket signs and like, this is unacceptable, and like really calling people out. And my thing is, it's not a Black thing.
Yeah.
Because America is America. We have an image in front of the world, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So my 25th college reunion is coming up, and I was talking recently with my college roommates about, should our reunion involve some sort of social justice aspect to it? Should we have sessions where we talk about kind of current issues? And yet, and to your point, I kept thinking that the one thing that we really could do that might actually have an impact and not just look like the headline of an Onion article, like Harvard class of 1997 votes to end climate change before going off to their black tie night at the Pops, was one thing my roommate said. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Like, what on earth is the Harvard class of 1997 going to do if they take a stand against climate change? But legacy admissions is something that would involve real self-sacrifice for the members of the Harvard class of 1997. So this is right, the leg up that your kids get when they apply to college.
Yes.
I think that's, you know, to your point about like, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to sacrifice? Right. It's all well and good to say like, yes, I want our country to be better. But when it comes to like, okay, are you willing to say Harvard and legacy admissions and minimize the chances that your own child is going to get in? I think that has much more power, right? It seems much more sincere. And
a statement, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that was my vote on my college. Anyway.
Did it have any traction?
I think my roommates, yeah. I think it was just like a discussion. We didn't really
it didn't get serious.
But you're right. The next step would be to really think like, okay, if we want to do this, how do we organize that? How do we talk to our classmates about that? How do we get a petition? I think it'd be a really hard sell. I think it would be a really hard sell.
What would be the hard sell part?
Well, all these people want their kids to go to Harvard. This is like
no, I don't care about that.
Well, that's that's.
I mean, me.
You, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. You're a Harvard class 25 years later. Most of those kids are private school quality.
Exactly. They've had every advantage.
If they don't have legacy into Harvard, they're still fine.
They're still fine, exactly.
That's not
their lives are set.
That's not going to change America.
Advantage.
That's not going to change their lives. It won't even make a dent.
Yeah.
Right. But if you told your class of how many estimated?
How many? I think it's 6,500 in a class. I think. Is that possible? No, that's the whole undergraduate population. Yeah. Sorry, I think it's 1,600. Yeah.
Okay. And you told them about this conversation we're having, and you're like, listen, who's serious to really like put your name on the petition to like to call out the Citizens United and put your name on these other things? How many of them you think would want to do that? I mean, I think that would be like something serious.
Well,
and make like a real.
So if I were to like email a random list of 100 people, I mean, this kind of goes to your point of like sales or like, you know, persuasion. If I were to email them, they'd be like, whatever, delete. But if somehow this could be presented as like, you really have a moral choice to make here. This is not something you can just delete from your inbox. This is a small, tiny little drop in the ocean of social injustice.
Right.
And yet, this is something you actually could maybe make an impact on.
Right. You're saying they wouldn't listen to you?
I think they wouldn't listen to just me. I think I'd have to get a group of people.
Well, you start with your friends,
right?
Your real friends, and then they start with their real friends,
right?
and then trickle, 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 you'll get you put together a little talk or whatever, and
Yeah.
like seriously, guys.
Yeah.
And once I'm assuming you could get 60% of them.
Oh, I think that's.
Just
I
to
doubt it.
sign their name. Like you don't have to do anything. Just sign your name on this. We think the Citizens United is hurting everything we've said. Like,
Yeah.
you don't think they would?
I mean, they'd certainly sign their name saying Citizens United is hurting. Would they sign their name to saying Harvard should end legacy admissions?
No. But this is what between me and you. I would say leave that alone. Like
the legacy admissions.
Yeah,
but I think the Citizens United, like what? I mean, that's the thing. Like, what would it matter if like the Harvard class of 1997 had 60% of its people?
So now you would then say, hey, Columbia, match it.
Mm-hmm.
Now Columbia says, hey, Yale, match it.
Mm-hmm.
And now you go around the whole table.
Yeah.
And we're willing to go on the Washington steps, 4th of July, pick a day, we're serious.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've made one little statement.
Yeah.
But now you can all the other lawyers are like, we agree with that.
Yeah.
And so this is something you have to follow up on. You can't just say we did it.
Right. No,
back.
that's right. Movement building is work. It's work.
And I'm not putting it all on you either. I'm just saying, like, this is the work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do we want a better America or not? Or are we just, we just sit back with our New York Times on Sunday and talk about how bad America is.
Right.
And
Right.
Like, is that what we're doing here? Because that's what we're experiencing.
Yes.
The people who could really fix America, they're like, oh, this is terrible. And they just.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm.
That's where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a written joke.
Yeah.
It's, you kind of pretend to make it incrementally better, but it's not going to get better. Mm-hmm. These people are still going to die, and you're just like, not me.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right. And the question is, how do you mobilize these people? It's not against their self-interest, right?
Is it though?
I mean, it's in the short term, yes. In the long term.
So what would happen if, like you said, it's against their self-interest? What would happen? The self-interest, like how would this hurt their self-interest?
To mobilize the people who sit back with the New York Times and say, oh, this is so bad. Well, it's no skin off their nose to go to a march. Like, they're all going to go to the Women's March. But to do more requires time.
Yeah.
They're busy. They've got the babies. They've got the this, right? All the things,
Yeah.
legitimate concerns that we talked about. They've got work demands. Life is busy.
I think before we ask everyone to go to Washington, I think we need to start with clicking.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, maybe that's what I need next, is some websites so you can do some clicking.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to be clear that, listen, what's unacceptable? That's the 8 things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this has to go. This is hurting America, clear, hands down. And we just want you to click here, right? Sign this petition. I want this to end. This is not my America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I think people will do, but I think that won't.
But I'm saying if 1,600 people from your graduation class clicked it, and obviously it's going to spread to the rest of Harvard over, those older and younger, and it's going to get out there, and at some point the news coverage will come. And I'm saying it's going to go to the Ivy Leagues, go to the prestigious ones, and like, America's taking a stand. And before you start marching, we need to be clear what we're taking a stand on and what's the hurt. America has had the Republican Party using these organizations to like clear language and not kind of like whisper it.
Yeah.
And this is unacceptable.
Right.
And it's killing people.
Right. Yeah, it's in some ways.
At some point, it's going to get political. Did you sign it?
Right.
Why did you sign it? Why didn't you want to sign it?
Right,
So-
like the
so-
letter, you followed this like Harvard controversy, this.
I haven't.
There is a famous anthropology professor who has been investigated for allegations of sexual harassment, et cetera, et cetera. There was a letter circulated by 39, I think, Harvard faculty, including many very prestigious members of the Harvard faculty, saying this is basically this, this is unseemly on the part of the administration. It looks like they're kind of making a mountain out of a molehill. From what we've heard, the allegations aren't that serious. And then this letter went around. And then the following day, the three women, I think there were more, but 3 women filed a lawsuit against Harvard, and their complaint came out, which the allegations were much more concerning, right? The allegations that were made public in that complaint were much more concerning than allegations that had previously been made public. And so 36 of the 39 Harvard faculty members then published another letter retracting their earlier letter and saying, we didn't know, sorry, oops, my bad.
Right.
So it's, the kind of, there is a kind of tendency to, it's easy to put together an online petition. COVID means we're all stuck in our houses, less so now than before, but the kind of rise of the, righteous petition, I don't know how beneficial it is. It can often be, based on incomplete information, like the
Well, that's
situation.
what we're gonna work on.
Yeah,
We needed to have complete information.
it has an impact, but
It's the first step. It's not the only step.
Yeah.
So once we have the first step and that begins to gain traction, the other steps will follow. Yeah. And like I said, 10 people on the steps making the statement clearly, and then we follow it up with another talk and another talk and spread the word of the petition.
Yeah.
And then it'll be, did you hear about this crazy law professor who's talking about, whatever? And you're like, yeah, she's right. I'm like, yeah, I agree. Are you going to sign it? And, you're going to have to go through those motions. It's not something, it may not go viral on day one. And between day one and when it actually goes viral, it's a little rocky. It'll go from a period of being quiet to being rocky. And then when it goes viral, you'll be a hero.
Yeah.
You'll definitely be a hero at the end, because at this point it's clear, like you're saying, like you want this. I think deep down in your heart, you want this. But I think most of us have gotten to a point where we're like, and that's really what scares me.
Right.
That's why I even talk to people and do, like, I think you know that if you stop the work you're doing, it would get worse, right? But you know that if you made a lot of strides in the next 10 years, that giant machine on the other side is going to slowly chip away at them. Those 2 steps back.
Right.
They're not going to stop. So we know that progress is being made, but on the other side, there's a bigger machine that's pushing all the work back. And they want to keep the profits. They want to keep us divided. They want to keep us arguing, keep us in a haze of confusion. And that's clear.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, it's given me a lot to think about.
So, one of your gifts is that I know you know a lot more, the legal documents and when I talk to you, you're so good at that. That's why I'm like, oh, James, you got to get in on this, because you know the ins and outs. Like I couldn't prepare anything. Like it would be like a really bad letter with typos.
No, not true,
But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like you would be able to cite Jefferson and cite all of the guys and say like, yeah, and I think like I said, the podcast is about reaching everyday people. And everyday people and the people who are doing the work up there's a disconnect, I think. So yeah, you need both sides.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, for sure. Tell me more of your thoughts.
mean, it's interesting because I think you're both saying, do the work to have a national impact, but also take the small self-sacrificing steps at the local level that are important to make change at the local level.
Right.
And above all, kind of think about, I mean, in some ways you're talking about something that is, you know, I think about a lot, which is what obligations we owe each other, right? They kind of don't think about what your responsibility is solely in terms of what is owed to you, or, you know, it's kind of the, you know, old JFK quote, like, ask not what you country do for you, ask what you do for your country. But like, essentially you're asking for a kind of recognition on the part of the people who really benefited from the system, but who are not happy with the way the system has worked out. They're kind of critical, but benefiting and staying quiet, to really ask themselves, like, what does it mean to be a good person in the United States of America in 2022? What obligations do I have to make my world better?
Right.
It's not enough to just sit back and
Donate
or
vote.
post on your Facebook page. Right, you have to do something, you have to get involved. I mentioned before we started recording that I watched your conversation with Beth Barron, and I thought her response on this kind of topic was really interesting, where she's, you know, she grew up the daughter of an immigrant in the Midwest, and kind of had drummed into her and has drummed into her kids the importance of not just, you can just sit there and say, oh my God, I'm so annoyed with how everything is, and then kind of, you know, that's the end of it. No, you have to get it in and change, because we are the people. It's us. If you don't like what's happening at the leadership level, get more involved, try to change it. I think that's right. It's much more, I think it's easier to see a path, certainly for me, on how to do that at the local level than how the national level. I mean, you've laid out a kind of path, which I think is, I have to give it a lot more thought. But right. I think everyone should feel much more obligated than they do. People of privilege, people who are lucky in this world, like my kids, like me, like my husband. You know, I try to, you know, impress upon my kids, like, you are so lucky. You are luckier than 99.9% of the world's population of children, right? You have, you know, every privilege imaginable, and that's an obligation. With privilege comes responsibility, right? You have to step up and do something, and the same goes for grown-ups.
Privilege, you have the requirement to do something, the expectation.
I think a moral responsibility.
Yeah. And I mean, based on the precedent, you know, if you just do what you've seen done before, it's kind of like donate, you know, do a week in Africa, or, you know. Right.
How do you do it? It's complicated. And there are lots of ways. You can join a nonprofit, start a nonprofit, like do some, you know, something, or get involved in politics. Or...
So here's the word, right? What I'm talking about is the bold reimagining, right? And this bold reimagining, I guess, I don't know, a year or 2 years before the Civil War, there was that energy, bold reimagining. Like, we have to, like, you know, but on some levels, a lot of the bold reimagining didn't happen, and it still kind of continued afterwards, right? So we know that things can be undone, and we can get a lot of progress. We can make it happen, and then, you know, 100 years from now, it can be undone, right? So what we're really talking about is everyone wants to be paid for their work and live safe and free, right? And I think there's this kind of capitalistic, imperialistic thing where if you can go to another country and sign the piece of paper and now control their economy, that's legal and okay. And that idea is a part of the problem, right? It's not just fix America. We have to shift the way we look at humanity. A legal document can never let you own a country's national resources because automatically now this country is now impoverished. Someone else is now exporting their resources, and now I'm thousands of miles away. I've never been there, and I'm sitting on top of their wealth here. Right? So the conversation is not about fixing America's legal system or changing America's power structure. It's about really thinking about humanity, right? America is just a byproduct of this thing. And I don't blame anyone who came before, because if you look at the game being played, you think, how can I win that game? As opposed to, how can I end that game? I get it. So if I'm born into a system and my dad says, grow the business, I get it, right? But now we're getting to a point, where we're literally killing the planet. And we know that there's a whole, there are nations who are just sitting in poverty because their resources are being sucked out. They signed some legal document 50 years ago, some guy who, got paid to sign this document, and now the country is impoverished and all of their resources are being, shipped out on ships and airplanes, and the people are just sitting there in poverty. Like we have to, like as human beings, you have to feel something for that, So if we've got finished on that project, it's more like a mindset shift, and it's the big work. I think deep down we all know it, like the same thing, America, that's America on the smaller level, but this is on the international level.
Yeah.
The only reason why people are trying to come to America is because their countries suffer.
Right.
And we have to address that at some point. I think what I'm saying, it's going to happen. I just don't want it to be 400 years from now.
Right.
And I don't want to, I'm not here saying, oh, elect me, I can fix it. I'm just saying that it's weird to me that we all know it and we're just kind of passively sitting back and kind of just watching it play out.
Right.
Because we're all on the wrong side of history in that regard. Our grandkids will say, well, what did you do?
Right.
Oh, I gave money in. I went there once and I checked the internet survey petition. I did that. It's more than that.
Right.
And I don't know how I got this energy for this thing, but I'm like, it's weird that we're just kind of like so easygoing about this,
Right. We see it all crumbling. We're kind of like, yeah. Yeah. I think it's a problem of collective action. It's a problem of difficulty diagnosing the problem. Like, what is the problem? Is the problem fundamentally money in politics? Is the problem fundamentally a kind of racial injustice? Is the problem fundamentally the structures of the American government? Is the problem fundamentally law and the kind of ways it props up property and aggravates, divides? It's really hard to kind of say this is so, you have your diagnosis problem. You don't know exactly the cause, the chain of cause and effect. Everybody knows they're all intermingled, but how exactly, we don't really know.
Right.
And then, because you've got the diagnosis problem, you have a problem figuring out what steps to take.
Right.
And so you really do just have to, as you're, just go, just try something. Just keep trying.
Right.
Because it's all a process. And there is going to be the 2 steps back, right? You can't think, okay, great, I can see my path to victory. There is no victory. That doesn't happen. It's always ongoing, right? Democracy is a process. I love that phrase because it's true. It is always a long game. Anyone who thinks it's a short game is deluding themselves. You're going to have some short-term victories and you'll have some short-term losses, but it's always a long game. And that goes for any kind of like winter.
Right. I think, America has, all men were created equal. This kind of defining document that I think that's at the core. We need some kind of defining document that we're working towards, right? But when it's being eroded along the way, we have to be brave enough to say, let's readdress our defining document, make it, fix it. If you're afraid to fix the defining document, then you're not gonna be able. If the problem is locked into the defining document and you don't fix it, you're not gonna get the problem.
Right.
So I don't think America can fix the world, but I think individually we can change our mindset, right? I don't know. Most people tell me I'm too idealistic.
I mean, what are you going to do without ideals? It really is so depressing to think like, we're all going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, I have one friend who is worried that her kids are feeling just kind of depressed about their future. I think that's a kind of common sentiment that people our age have kids who are inheriting all of these problems. I didn't feel that way when I was their age. I didn't really know. I was their age, in the 80s, early 90s. I wasn't totally aware of how dire climate change was and was going to become. I was progressive in my politics, and I was unhappy with the Reagan years, and I was unhappy with the way, as much as a child can be. I absorbed little bits here and there, but yeah, I basically had a kind of sense that like things are basically getting better. My life was getting better. Things in the world were getting better. Like things used to be really bad, and now they're improving. And I don't think our kids have that sense, and that's probably a more accurate sense. They have a better sense, a more honest sense of the world than I did. But you don't want them to be left feeling like, throw my hands up, right? You want them to kind of feel like there is some possibility to fix things. You want them to have the ideals, and you want them to have a sense of like, change is possible.
Right. Well, we're passing the baton, so we have to show them the work that we're doing, and that'll empower them. I want to continue my mom's work.
Right.
I see what my mom was doing, and I feel empowered, as opposed to, mom's kind of like throwing her hands up, and everyone's throwing their hands up, and that's where it comes from.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, tell me what you think. This is.
In addition to all I've already said, I don't know. Yeah, it's. You kind of. We've had a wide-ranging conversation that's touched on a lot of kind of issues, both like of history, but also and of politics and of strategy, but also how do you live your life as a moral human being? What difference can you make? I think, it kind of end where we started. Again, I was talking the same friend who's worried about her kids kind of being depressed about their futures, asked me if I thought it was depressing. I would, I think her sense, she's not a historian, her sense is generally that things are kind of backsliding, that we're backsliding, which in many ways I think is totally fair understanding. Right. Things in many ways are worse, than they have been. And I was telling her that I take comfort in the long historical view that things have been pretty bad before. It's not like we were at this kind of like peak where we had won and now we're all just kind of like falling off. No, like we had valleys and we had, mountains and valleys, peaks and valleys. History is always like this, if you were viewing it from the perspective that you and I share, kind of you want people's lives, everyone's lives to be better, right? You want to kind of to share the wealth more broadly. We want justice, we want equality, et cetera, then history looks like that. But I take comfort in that because I feel like, so now we're in one of these troughs. But it doesn't mean that we're going to be in the trough forever. It's not like we've fallen, history is like this and we're just down in the inevitable downward slope. And B, I find it very comforting to think that that life, political struggles, democracy, they are all a process, right? There is no victory where you're like, great, we did it, we fixed democracy, everyone is equal, we fixed poverty, nobody's poor anymore. A, that's not gonna happen. But B, like, I mean, yeah, I think what makes life worth living is kind of fighting for these ideals, right? Your ideals that you mentioned, like that's what really in the end gives life meaning. It's kind of, so in some ways we should embrace struggle. We shouldn't embrace the hardships that it brings, but we should recognize that struggling is a part of what gives life meaning, and working to make things more equal and better for others is what gives life meaning. And so just because the struggle is kind of, it doesn't look like we're on the upswing right now, shouldn't make us lose heart.
When was the last upswing? I mean, was it like the Civil War?
No, I mean, it depends on what measuring stick you're using.
Yeah, what you just said.
I think from a legal perspective, the kind of 50s and 60s and 70s, where you had kind of major pieces of legislation that improved lives meaningfully. And
we fought hard. When I say we, I mean the people. We fought hard for that. And there was a lot of opposition. And then a lot, right?
Yeah, and since then, right, there was a lot of opposition.
It was given begrudgingly. It wasn't like, of course you're American, of course you're equal.
Right.
It was like, we have to give them something to keep them calm.
Yeah, or it was, legal changes and put in place by politicians who maybe it was a result of something called, this legal scholar who recently died called Derek Bell, called interest convergence, where like you might want, voting rights for, to make it easier for Black people to vote. And this person might not really care about whether Black people can vote, but they want this, voting block, or they want this district to kind of elect them. So you have this kind of, people want the same outcome for different reasons. So their interests converge, and they end up making progress.
Right.
I can't remember where I started with that, but yeah.
We're on the upswing.
We're on the upswing.
So here's my, right? So let's say humanity started here, right? Or whatever we hear, we're going up and down. But I think there's this, we're not up and down, like we're going all the way back up. We're kind of like.
You think we are in a kind of overall decline?
Overall decline, right? Maybe. Now, I don't have a doom and gloom outlook. I do think there's hope. I think if we could adjust what we're doing with the climate now and recover, right? It's not a mystery, right? But it's not gonna happen unless you break up the big corporations and whatever it is they're doing to push back. It's vividly clear, right? And we see it. And again, we're fighting the battle, but we're accepting the crumbs.
Yeah.
We know we're accepting the crumbs. And as long as we're okay with the crumbs, you're gonna lose. That is gonna continue going down. And we can all see that clearly. People were saying exactly what we were saying for a long time. And we've accepted the crumbs. And if we continue that 20 more years, we'll be worse.
Yeah.
So we have to say, women's, I have to touch on this. This one just keeps coming up. Women's rights, the abortion, right? What does the Constitution have to say about women's rights and abortion?
Well, you have the Bill of Rights, which has been interpreted by the court to kind of protect certain privacy rights, including in Roe v. Wade, the right to terminate a pregnancy up to a certain point. And the court has kind of always acknowledged it's balancing the state's interest in protecting the fetus against the mother's interests, right? So there's always this balance. And in some ways, there's a professor at Columbia Law School called Jamal Green, who has published a book a year and a half, 2 years ago, kind of decrying the way in which these sorts of battles, which are so political, have become so dominated by rights talk in this country. So right of the unborn child versus right of the mother, right? It's this kind of like, no, again, a zero sum conception of the stakes and of the outcome. Either the fetus wins or the mother wins, but there's no kind of middle ground. And his point in this book is if we look to other kind of Western democracies, these problems are not kind of fought on the terrain of individual rights as much as they are kind of political give and take. So there are, regulations in much of Europe that permit abortion up to a certain point for certain reasons. There are kind of exceptions and this and that, right? But it's this kind of like collaborative process with lots of emotions involved, obviously, but that results in a kind of status quo that does not produce a hot button political issue the way it does in this country. Obviously some of the hot button political nature of abortion has to do with the ways that political parties on both the right and the left have used it to generate interest and draw constituents, right? Pro-life, pro-choice, it's like a draw on both sides. So,
right.
It's a potent tool for a political organizer. But it also has to do with the way we conceptualize it, where it's like zero sum game, the stakes are incredibly high. If you win, I lose, and vice versa, as opposed to like, okay, let's try to figure out a way to legislate this terrain and come up with reasonable solutions that we can all agree with. It's now so emotional and political, and there's so much money involved in the fight that it seems really hard to do that. I think what the court has said in the Texas case and what it may well do in the Mississippi case is horrible, terrifying because it's going to, already basically women in Texas cannot get abortions, and terrible because the court has basically rubber stamped vigilante justice, the way the law, the kind of evil Machiavellian or evil genius way, not Machiavellian, but evil genius way the law is put together means that you can't get federal courts to rule on the constitutionality or unconstitutionality of the law in the same way that you ordinarily can, because the various rules governing which cases can be heard in federal court. So it's kind of an invitation for other states to do the same.
So help me out. Are abortions legal in every state right now?
Yes, because of Roe v. Wade. You have to, by the Constitution, you cannot make abortions illegal. But
so
that's the letter of the law. But whether or not it is easy to get an abortion in every state is a very different question. States can impose all sorts of hurdles, like parental consent, 24-hour waiting period. A lot of states require you to kind of like get counseling before you have an abortion, which means, a lot of kind of very slanted discussion of the baby you're about to kill, that kind of thing.
So the conversation is not about banning abortions, period.
Well, in the Mississippi case that is going to be decided is Mississippi has banned abortions, I think, after 15 weeks, I think. They've banned abortions after 15 weeks, which is much earlier than the previous period.
But up to 15 weeks, that's not in question.
So now again, I should
It's okay.
say all sorts of caveats. No, basically they said the law, I think, is 15 weeks, but that Mississippi's lawyer in argument, I think, I should really double check this. Listeners, you should double check this before you quote me. During oral argument in the court, basically invited the court to overturn Roe v. Wade. So basically to allow a state to make abortion illegal in any case, in any circumstance, at any stage of the pregnancy.
Why? Why are we against abortion?
Again, I think abortion is a difficult issue. But the idea that a woman should not be able to control her own body, decide whether or not she wants to have a baby, is so repugnant and terrifying.
Yeah. And like, do you think it's politically? Do you think these people are like morally? Like, there's something behind this, and I really don't know. Like, and maybe I'm just asking you. Maybe you don't know. But I think there's something behind this anti-abortion thing.
So there is a really good a NARAL podcast put out by Elise Hogue based on a book she wrote, and it has a catchy title that I have not caught because I cannot remember it. But it basically aims at showing the kind of ways in which the conservative movement identified pro-life advocacy as a winning political issue. So, before Roe in 1973, Republicans were mostly, a majority of Republicans, not a huge majority, but a majority were pro-choice. And Democrats actually were on the other side. There were more Democrats. I don't know if there were a majority of Democrats who were pro-life, but it was much more, it was not unheard of, let's say that, for Democrats to be pro-life. Democrats historically had drawn from Catholic working class voters, so the Catholic Church was kind of influential. And after Roe v. Wade was decided, the Republican Party initially did not take up the mantle and say, aha, this is horrible. We have to overturn Roe v. Wade, protect the rights of the unborn child. It kind of didn't make much of a ripple until later on in the late 70s, early 80s, when, Elise Hogue's argument is that the religious right was very upset about the federal government's involvement in, they were upset about the civil rights movement. They were upset about school desegregation. They were upset about basically the federal government's getting involved in questions of race at the state level, and increasingly kind of preventing states from permitting racial injustice, permitting racial discrimination. And she talks about this one conference call among Republican Party operatives in which somebody suggested that basically they were saying, what's the issue that's going to grab people? We can't really publicly say we oppose civil rights. That's a losing political argument. We have to find some other issue that's going to attract voters. And someone suggested abortion, which the idea was you bring in the religious right, bring in kind of fundamentalist Christians who were not really political actors at that point.
Right.
And that was, it turned out, a really winning issue. It really brought a lot more people into the Republican Party. So part of the answer to the question of like, what's this all about is kind of like evil genius from my progressive perspective, political organizing.
So do you still think that's the case? Like not everyone thinks that, but the people who are behind it, they're using this thing to rope people into their other bigger agenda.
I do think, right. So when I see like Republican, white, male politicians getting up and talking about abortion, do I think in most cases they really are deeply moved by the rights of the unborn child? No. I think they see this as a potent organizing tool. Right. I do think there are plenty of people who are sincerely deeply moved by this. And I think it is a very difficult question.
Yeah. Listen, something's weird about it. I'm comfortable telling you, something is weird about this thing, because I know a lot of well-to-do middle-class women in Princeton who decided to have an abortion, and it wasn't because they didn't have money. Right. They just didn't want to make their family bigger. They didn't want another kid. Right. It happened, and I don't want another kid.
Lots of people do, and it's interesting.
So
it's interesting that there is a shame in talking about that.
Right. But it's weaponized. People, it's hard for some people to see the weaponization behind it and understand why, But it is weird that there's a lot of women who are actively fighting for these rights and these kinds of things. And I know that it boils down to what you're saying, but I didn't understand the direct history of it.
Yeah.
Right? But to me, that's what everything boils down to. If we can stir them up, keep them distracted, keep them confused and arguing and going back and forth, they're not going to focus on the real problem. And that's the way the world is functioning now. We see people dying in the street. We see it on TV. We know how bad this is, but I'm too busy. And I have to focus on this instead. And this is how the world is just kind of going. Now, to tie this in, religion falls into all of this, right? We have this, what would Jesus do kind of thing. And we know that Jesus wouldn't want us to be allowing these things. And, but there's this kind of sense of waiting till Jesus comes,
Yeah.
And I think you said before, I have to come back to it. I think we can fix democracy. I think we can end poverty, but as long as, if we never dismantle that corporate interest that's going to be eroding it, we have to, in addition to fixing democracy and ending poverty, we have to dismantle, not end corporations from having money and power, not stop them from having money, but stopping them from having power over our system.
Right. Well, I think that is, to me, that goes hand in hand with fixing democracy. You can't do one without the other.
That's what I'm saying. So you kind of said like, no, it's overarching. We can't fix democracy. And I'm like, we can.
Well, I think there are always going to be people fighting against expanding power to other people, extending power to other people. It's always going to be a fight. What I was trying to say is like, there's never going to be a point where like, great, done. No one will ever resist.
I think we can put something like, you can say, but you can say whatever you want. You can suggest whatever you want. But at the end of the day, like, no, rights are inalienable. No, we're not going to give this group an advantage. We're not going to.
Right. Well, that depends on courts that will interpret the Constitution in a democracy-friendly way, which depends on who gets appointed to the court, which depends on which political party is in power. And
that's the thing. You're saying it. We have all of these structures in place to make it hard to actually have democracy. And that we really have to look at that. And it's uncomfortable. I think we've gotten comfortable with what's in place. And America's still young, right? And if you upset that now, if you try to upset that now, it's, it's like a French Revolution kind of thing. Like, let's just leave it alone, because if we upset it, it can fall apart. Is that an argument?
No, I don't think anyone makes that argument like, let's be thankful for what we've got. But right, I guess there is a question of like how radical, like what is the solution? Do we want revolution? As how feasible would it be? We've got a massively militarized federal government, so it's pretty hard to prevail in a revolution in which people, you could have a coup. A coup would be more, as we have seen. It is dangerously possible to have a coup that seizes control undemocratically of the government.
So we kind of indirectly touched on it, but the powers that be, the military is kind of in line with them. I think you were kind of saying.
Well, I'm just saying that a revolution like the French Revolution it's not like the French government had control of nuclear weapons, right? It's not like they had a revolution without access to the federal government's awesome power, like physical police, military power, not get far, I don't think,
right. So just to clarify what we're actually saying, right? If we're trying to restructure the Constitution to make things work, in a way we want, right? It can be seen as a revolution. And if it's seen as a revolution, then the military can be engaged to
Well,
put
no.
down
I think if you
on some in some that's what we're saying. Like at some point it can be anti.
I'm thinking about revolution in the classic, like violent revolution sense.
Right.
Restructuring, like going through the kind of defined channels to change government, like amending the Constitution, ending the filibuster, et cetera, et cetera. Those I don't think would, well, God, I hope not, provoke a violent military reaction on the part of the executive branch. I mean, who knows? But
it's a real question. Because we're really, what we're doing here is sketching out a roadmap, and we have to put that on the table, I think. Yes or no?
Violent military reaction to pro-democracy reforms?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, January 6th, sure. Yeah, we do have to put that on the table. Yeah.
And again, most people are like okay with the way things are, so they're not willing to go that far.
Not willing to go that far. To reform democratic reforms?
Right.
Pro-democratic. Well, I think people are but would they be willing to put themselves in the line of fire?
That's right.
I see what you're saying. That's an interesting question. I don't know. If you were like,
subconsciously, this is a part of this.
Yeah. If you increasingly see kind of standing up for democratic principles as putting yourself in personal peril, how many people will keep their head in the sand? Probably a lot.
So remember, we talked about 1 million people every weekend. At some point, we're going to step on someone's lawn, and it's going to be trespassing, and it's going to be like, oh, we had to arrest these people because they were trespassing. Right. And now, and little by little, people are getting clubbed in the head.
Like the civil rights movement. And
it's like, no, we just want to and then it's like, oh, they're villains, they're they want to tear down our democracy, they're anti-American. This is just, and it gets to a point where it gets crazy. And now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think before we take out the permits to get to start protesting, we need to be very clear of all the ins and outs. And it doesn't matter if you disagree. We just need to be clear, like, of what the actual goal is. And, because I love the Constitution. It says all men were created equal. So can we just clarify that? Instead of having these
the Declaration says that, the Constitution doesn't. No, but that's part of our problem. If only we have the 14th Amendment, which says a lot of stuff about equality. But yeah. No, it's right. You have these documents, they say certain things, they don't say other things. That's a problem. And even the documents that do say those things can be interpreted to mean other things. Yeah.
Just want to make sure it's clear, and make sure that there's not this outside entity that we all see who's clearly, I want the people to sit in the room and have the corporation step outside and let the people agree on what are we really talking about here? Do you have a problem with a 16-year-old getting an abortion, or is this something else?
Right.
And I think there's some people out there who's going to say, I don't want an integrated America. I don't want to live among those people. And I think they have their own rights too. And I don't think we should force them to whatever. Right. I think you should be able to keep that position and have a place where you can live free from those people. And that's something I've said since I started this podcast, where I was like, what am I saying? Because the reality is, as long as they're stoking the fire with what they're doing, right? And they're doing it secretly, allow them to say it publicly and allow them to live the way they want to live. And I don't think those people want to live amongst them. I think they can go off and have their white town, and no one would be upset about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do think we can't write anybody off. We have to keep listening to people.
That's what I'm
we
saying.
Can profoundly disagree with them. I think what they're saying is dangerous, wrong, etc. But we can't. Right. This is, I think the Bill of Rights has something to say about this. It's really important. You have to let people say their piece, no matter how repugnant it is. But where it becomes tricky is, if White Town means that people of color are suffering, right?
Right. No, right.
And that it's hard to have one without the other. It's hard to have, right? Because part of what White Town involves is a preservation of privilege and power and the disempowering of others. Maybe not. Maybe
No. White Town means you can live there, you can do whatever you want over there, but we are going to have our equal town where we can do whatever we want.
right. I mean, that's
And-
kind of like gated communities, right?
Right.
But then those gated communities have clout often, or they break down
Well,
the
in
public
this new
sphere.
America, I don't think they would. I think anyone who was over there it would be like a dystopian place where every year people move from out of there.
I hope so. I
Yeah.
hope so. I mean, the worry is that the more privatized things get, or the more fragmented things get, the less people invest in the middle. And there's a powerful pull to being with people like you, right? So White Town, I mean, God, I would hope White Town, no one would want to live there, but I'm sure there would be people who wanted to live there. And it wouldn't just be because it was only white people. It would also be, there's such a great pool there. And there's such good public schools there.
Right.
And
Well, so the fact that I'm saying this is a big stretch, right? The reason why I'm saying this is because I acknowledge that there are white people who really think that they don't want to be among gays.
Mhm,
I don't want to be among Black people.
mhm.
I don't want, and I'm saying that if an individual feels that, I don't think it's fair to now start shoving your kids into their classroom.
I don't know. I feel terrible, but I have to go.
Okay, no problem. We did it.
Yeah, we
did
had a
it.
long talk.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
well, our next conversation will be about if you can shove their kids into the classroom. I kind of think maybe you can.
We're talking about public school,
Yeah,
right? So in White Town, I don't think anyone would want you to say, do you want your Black kids in White Town? No, you move out,
I know, but that's the history of America. That's how we've gotten so segregated.
Well, the problem is, well, I won't keep you, but thank you so much.
Yes,
You've
no,
been really, really awesome.
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah. So let me know what next steps,
Yeah.
and you reach out and let me know. Okay.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes.
This was a lot of fun, and you gave me so much to think
Yes.
about.
Yes. And please let's finish and do more another time.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Thank you. You don't
Yeah.
want to take